Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Marcelo Zarvos, the great and prolific composer who scored projects such as The Equalizer 3, Ray Donovan, both the film and the TV series, Emancipation, The Good Shepherd, The Beaver, You Don't Know Jack, Brooklyn's Finest, Cassandro, The Guilty, What's My Name, Muhammad Ali, Fences, The Affair, Flamin Hot, Big George Foreman, White Men Can't Jump, May December, and many more. He has worked with accomplished directors such as Barry Levinson, Denzel Washington, Jodie Foster, Antoine Fuqua, Todd Haynes, and many more. It is my pleasure to welcome Marcelo Zarvos.
Hello, Michael. So fun to be here. I'm so happy to be talking to you. I've been watching your interviews for a long time, and I was so thrilled when you asked me to be a part of your show. So thank you.
Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. And thank you very much for your kind words about my show and my program. I'm really happy about that and honored and flattered. Marcelo, how would you describe your musical style and how you applied and developed it for your recent projects?
Well, as you can, we can get into each one in particular. They're all quite different. And I think that in many ways, this year was sort of like a culmination of all the work I've done for a very long time in all sort of walks of film scoring, if you will, and so from lighter things like Flamin Hot and White Man Can Jump to pretty dark and brooding May December and Equalizer and Cassandro. It was, I try to approach it as an actor would, where I am, at the service of the show, trying to bring out my experience and the different styles that I've worked with over the years, but always with the intention of doing something different and new and unique to the film. So even though, one interesting case would be Cassandra and Flamin Hot, both movies that have a very strong Mexican element in them, but they had to be very different approaches to how we approached Mexican music. But across the board, my feeling is always, it has to be unique to this film, and we want something that will be identified as that film and not no other film. And luckily, I've had a lot of experience in a lot of different types of films and TV shows and stuff to draw from, but it is always the white page and the kind of the blank page at the beginning, and just as terrifying now as it was many years ago when I got started.
I know that a filmmaker or a composer needs inspiration. Which film do you think was the most inspirational?
Well, that's hard, I mean, they're all very inspirational in many different ways. I really, really loved working on Cassandro because I felt like it was something that I hadn't quite done something like that. And I couldn't think of there was no real temp, so to speak. So we kind of really did what felt right. Equalizer was also really, really, really high on my inspiring list because, of course, it's a director that I adore and have collaborated with a lot. But it was also walking into a very successful franchise that had fantastic scores by Harry Gregson Williams, for the first two episodes. Harry's a composer that I admire, studied his music, and really also he's a friend, and so that was inspiring in a terrifying kind of way, but I feel like ultimately I try to bring my full attention and my full presence to each of these projects. And when I'm working on them, they are it. And that's all that I think of. And I can kind of like live. I mean, luckily, not all these projects were scored this year. Cassandra and Flamin Hot were completed last year. So, it's been a minute. But I would say probably the closest to my heart would be Cassandro and Equalizer and Flamin Hot as well. Just the whole Latin thing feels very, very dear to me, even though I'm not Mexican and Brazilian. Still, it was fun to score not one but two movies that deal with Latinos and with also immigrants like myself that have come to this country. So it's very on a personal level. I would say those two projects were very meaningful to me.
And Cassandro has a very nice main theme. It's a very catchy theme, but it also, let's say, represents different sides of the character. It feels somewhat heroic, yet it also has a certain mysterious vibe to it. How did you land on this theme, and how did you analyze the character?
Well, I wrote first the sort of this theme for the opening, and for, one of the things about Cassandro is that there's two very different sides of this character, right? Even not thinking just about the evolution of Sal, who's the real name of Cassandro, into Cassandro and in the fights, but also his life outside of the ring with his mother, with his lover. There's a lot of pathos. It's very melancholic, a little sad, really, the life of a guy struggling in his work, struggling in his life and in his love life. And so there was something very melancholic, and that's where the theme started. So I wrote it first for the opening sequence when Saul is walking through Juarez and going through the border and all of that. It's a nice big chunk. I could really develop a melody there. And Roger really loved it right away. With the only directive that I had before writing the theme was that he really wanted us to explore the trumpet, and so I was thinking of a melody that would sound good on trumpet and had that kind of lonely kind of vibe to it. And then I always, for me, when I'm scoring the film, I'm scoring three things. I'm scoring how I see it, I'm scoring the film itself, and I'm also scoring the vision of the director, because the directors, I find it very inspiring how they will talk about what they're looking for in music. And in the case of Cassandro, we had discussed this there was this very melancholic, and there was also sort of a noirish quality. A lot of the scenes are at night. And so we also talked a lot about jazz and Miles Davis, and our shared love of Miles Davis, mine and Roger Ross Williams. So that was kind of the kickoff. And once I had that theme, I started to then use that motif, da-da-da-da-da, as a kind of, in other parts of the film, like particularly in the fights, eventually it finds its way into the fights in a much more heroic way, like you said. And one of the things I loved about the trumpet is that at a certain range and with a certain dynamic, the trumpet is the mellowest, softest, very lyrical instrument, and it's just like a human voice. But then if you open it up, and particularly in the higher registers, it's the heroic. I mean, it's literally what people play in the battles and for war and all of that. So we were very happy in our choice of instrumentation for this one, because I felt like the trumpet could, on its own, capture a huge sort of wide range of emotion and drama in Cassandro's character. And so, and as the story evolves, as he first comes up with the idea of Cassandro, and then as Cassandro becomes a winner and Cassandro becomes a star, the music also gets bigger and more inspiring, more inspirational, and broader, if you will. And so, but it was very important for me that theme was able to work both in the small, subdued, melancholic sections, but also in the bigger parts, which are fights. And the lucha libre, of course, I think it's a sport, but it's also a performance. It's very much, there's a lot of theater in it, and they talk about what's going to happen. They are getting hurt. It's no, I had the chance to talk to Gael Garcia Bernal, the actor, and he talked a lot about his training. And so people do get hurt. And the Cassandro himself ultimately suffered even a stroke later in life, and probably caused by just the harshness of the conditions of the fight. There is that great element of just theater, almost of a circus-like thing, with the costumes and these different characters with funny names and kind of and so I felt like there was also an element of going into this magical kind of world. I mean, I sometimes find that sports people are kind of like our real life superheroes. I mean, I think people that do sports, whether it's I remember I had a chance to work on a great documentary about Muhammad Ali, and the director always told me, he's the real superhero who dies for their art. Just like Cassandro, he's alive, thank God, but he did get quite sick, and he really sacrificed his health for the art. So, and I feel like that's the definition of a hero to me, somebody that will kind of go all the way. And I felt like the music needed to do all of this, but without getting sweet and kind of and just too Hollywood. The director Roger Ross Williams this is his first narrative film, and he wanted a real grittiness to the story as well. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to this film, was how gritty it was, how real. You can feel that the environment, it's not a pretty environment, it's a harsh environment, but it's also inspiring. And it's not just, a lot of people that I talk to when they watch the movie are like, oh, I was just waiting for something horrible to happen. But ultimately, this is an inspiring story. This is somebody that actually said, hey, I'm not happy with how things are, I'm going to change this. And he did it. And he put, his money where his mouth was, and kind of really made these characters, this exoticos, which is the type of character that he was, which tended to be more of a punching bag in the world of lucha libre. And he said, no, I'm going to win. And win he did.
This wasn't the only time that you entered the ring this year, or respectively last year, when you completed it. You also scored the big George Foreman. Obviously, I think anybody knows who George Foreman is or was. He was a fantastic fighter and boxer, and you scored this film too, a very inspirational picture. And I think Forrest Whitaker in this film says that the biggest fight we will ever combat is in our head. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. And how do you develop and shape your ideas? I mean, of course, obviously, you being a composer, I can imagine you must be wrestling with all kinds of ideas constantly. How did you, let's say, tackle the George Foreman story?
The George Foreman, I mean, there was really also a very inspirational story, perhaps the most overtly inspirational of the movies I worked on this year. He was definitely somebody that came from nowhere, but not only did he become wildly successful, but he also became a preacher. Down the line, at some point, he stopped his career, went and became a preacher for, I don't know, something like 10, 15 years, maybe more, and came back to win the title in his 40s, which is the oldest anybody has ever done that. So there were two things really. I mean, you can't emphasize enough George Foreman, the fighter, because he was a fabulous, fabulous boxer, and so strong, like a crazy, crazy strong punch. But also, boxing, as Forrest Whitaker talks about, is not just about punching, it's about your mind. That's who wins a fight. That's why Muhammad Ali was who he was. He fought with his brains more than with his muscles, and I think the moment that George Foreman realizes that is the moment he's able to come back and win this title. But one of the things that I really talked about with the director in this film was how every fight tells a story, and that's every one of his fights from the very beginning, from the time that he actually goes into the ring, and it's not even a professional fight, when he first tries out and he gets punched out immediately and falls to the floor. They're all telling a story, and that's a part of it that I always draw back to my years. I got started before I worked on films. I wrote a lot of music for dance in New York City, and for modern dance companies and ballet companies, and I always think of boxing, and not to bring it back to Cassandro, but also mentioning that I think about the dance aspect of it, bodies moving, and how they tell a story that is a little bit more abstract, possibly. When you see two people fighting, like in George Foreman in his fights, you are seeing two very strong men going at each other, but there is a story, and there are peaks and valleys, and nobody, unless it's like Mike Tyson would go and knock somebody out in like 90 seconds, when he was at his height. For the most part, boxing has to do with time. I remember one director one time told me that the boxers are really fighting with the clock. That's who they are fighting with, and fighting with time, and being able to survive just long enough. Sometimes the one that wins is just the one that has a little bit more left to stand, because they're always like, you know, really destroyed by the time whether they win or lose. And then so the fights were very important, and have a sense of build of his confidence, his victorious music. But then once things starts to go wrong, the music had to reflect that as well. And then when he has his big downfall, more or less halfway through the film, the film becomes a different film. It becomes a story of a man trying to find himself, and a man who lost everything and finds his way back through being a preacher and through his belief in God. And so the film kind of becomes this other thing, and eventually those two it's almost like it splits up in two at that point. And then in the end, when he comes back to fight, both his faith and his skills as a boxer come together, and it's a very inspiring moment, obviously, when he comes back and wins. And I just love, again, how those fights tell a story, and how the choreography, of course, when they're fighting boxing, they are really fighting. That there's nothing really preordained, like in the lucha libre stuff, but still they tell a story, and their looks, and in between each round, what's talked with the coach, and the instructions and all of that. And one of the tricky things, just as you do in a film, is where you don't want to reach the peak too soon. In the fights, or in a film that has multiple fights, like Big George Foreman, you want to pace yourself and make sure that the music is not simply about, oh, he's going to win, it's a winning thing, it's all about victory. It's a lot more about fighting your own demons. And I think in that way, as a composer, I can relate to that. We have a lot of thoughts, like you mentioned in the beginning of your question, of you have a lot of ideas in your head, and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? But you have to keep going, and you have to keep trying, and you have to calm those voices in your head in order to let a good piece of music come out, a good melody, a good theme, or a good punch in the case of George Foreman.
And of course, you must not only have the musical skills, but analytical skills as well. I mean, you are dealing with multiple characters here. I mean, we just mentioned George Foreman, or Cassandro, or let's say Robert McCall, Denzel Washington's character in The Equalizer. So you must be able to find a theme or a rhythm or a motif which not only fits the character but also reflects the story. So how do you like to start a picture? Do you try to analyze the character and say, well, that sound, that's Denzel Washington, or that's a George Foreman sound? Or do you like to, let's say, watch the film and try to figure out which sounds or musical colors may best fit the picture as a whole?
Well, I'll say that, of course, it's always a little bit different. And I think, as you do, you have the privilege of scoring a lot of films like I have, you kind of, sometimes you start at the end, sometimes you start at the beginning, sometimes in the middle, so. But one thing that I tend to do more and more as I've evolved as a film composer is that once I watch the film or read the script, I like to sit back and kind of go away from picture for a little bit, and then just try to come up with music that I feel like represents this film. Sometimes not even necessarily thinking, oh, this is the theme that is going to go for, this is Robert McCall's theme. I tend to start with just broader ideas and just kind of write. I write a lot. I mean, it's not uncommon that I will write upwards of 20 themes for a movie, or 30 themes, even though I might only use a very small portion of that. So I'd like to really just not censor myself and just say, and sometimes it happens that you write something, it's like, wow, this is really good, but this is not appropriate for this film. So I'll put it aside. Maybe one day I'll use it. But I think it's very important to also not censor yourself when you're writing. I was just reading this interview with the great Stephen Sondheim, the great musical composer, and he said that when you're writing, you just have to write, and don't edit yourself as you're writing. The edit comes later. So I tend to kind of go and write a lot of themes, And then once I get to, I have a handful of them, I'll listen back. Sometimes I will share these wild themes with the director before even putting anything to picture. And that depends on the director and depends on how they like to work. But eventually, of course, then you start to really try things with picture and seeing what's resonating. But I've learned through the years, of my experience, there's been directors that I work with that like to put a certain piece of music that I wrote for one character in another part of the movie or in another character altogether. And that used to really disturb me. But then I learned to kind of sit back and watch it and say, whoa, maybe there's something here. And I've seen many times when directors or picture editors or music editors have shown me in my own music things that I was not aware that were there. So I'll start by writing, as I said, a lot of different ideas, and then I'll start to kind of try them and sometimes none of these ideas will work. It has happened before that everything I do that is wild is like, that's not quite right, but still puts you in the mood and you start to just think about the characters. Because the one thing that I would say that all of the characters that in all of these movies that I worked on this year or in my life really that I always try is to score what's inside them. What matters to me is not what they look like. It's not how hard they fight or punch or how funny they are or how scary they are, but what's inside them. And I learned with the best, which are these incredible directors that I get to work with. And for instance, Antoine Fuqua, the director of Equalizer, is always primarily interested in what's happening inside. And I think one of the reasons that he wanted me to work on Equalizer 3 was there were two things. One was that we had just come off of doing Emancipation and we were very close and working, and although I had done many other movies with him, but also the movie takes place outside of the realm of the first two. He's literally in another country. He's kind of like a fish out of water. And I think Antoine felt like he wanted a completely different sound for Equalizer 3. No, different themes, different everything. He's in a foreign land. And that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that he is becoming the monster that he is fighting. So he starts to enjoy the killing too much. He starts to kind of get into it and kind of take pleasure in it. And he realizes that. So there's a lot about this movie that is really, and that's the part that always fascinates me with Antoine, is that we talked a lot about like the spirituality of Robert McCall. He's a religious man. He somehow negotiates all of that in his mind. He's of course a vicious assassin, and you don't want to cross that guy, as we've seen. No bad guys come get out scotch free on these movies. But in this one, it's a lot about him like starting to feel like he's losing his bearings of who he is. And I think because of the many dramatic projects I had worked with Antoine, he also felt like it would be a good fit. So movies like The Guilty that we done, a couple years ago, where it's very much an internal movie, or even Brooklyn's Finest, which had these three characters wrestling with corruption and life and all of that. So, but he's always like, even on Emancipation, where, it's a big story about slavery and about an escape, but he's not interested in the action as far as the music is concerned. Of course, Antoine sets up some of the greatest action scenes, that any director does. I mean, it's fantastic, the killings and he's very meticulous. He really studies. He talked for Equalizer. He's been talking to special ops, guys for a long time. In other projects too, he really understands that world and wants to do, because I think that's the difference with on something like Robert McCall on Equalizer and let's say John Wick, which is a movie I love. But everything that McCall does is possible that he would do. That it is okay. It's a tall order, but there's nothing there that he doesn't fly and he doesn't go through walls and he doesn't kill 300 people in one fight. I mean, so it is all doable, and Antoine is very interested in that part, in the inside of what's happening in McCall. Why is he doing this, and what are his conflicts? Because I think one of the things that music can help is illuminate the conflict. And drama is all about conflict, right? You have this problem, you have this conflict in this character that they need to resolve, and we're watching for 2 hours to see if it's going to get resolved or not. And so with Antoine, it's a lot about the spiritual and the inside, which I love, and it's what I think my music does the best, is this kind of internal scoring, if you will.
It has a certain reflective tone to it. And of course, Robert McCall's character, Denzel Washington's character, he's looking for a way out. We also witnessed that in right from the word go when we saw the Equalizer Part 1. But he witnessed the atrocities that the people in his environment had been exposed to, and then he decides to chip in and to kick some butt and to protect the innocent, so to speak. And the Equalizer Part 3, it's kind of a clean slate, musically speaking, because you didn't use any of the previous themes, because Harry Gregson Williams scored the first two films. So your music felt completely different, and new themes, new material, and a new approach, so to speak, even though we were, of course, familiar with the story and the characters.
Definitely. For me, personally, as a composer, it was Equalizer 1. The way that I saw it was like, there was the first one. And because if Antoine had told me, hey, I want you to use the themes, of course I would have done it. And I was prepared to do it, but it was just for the story. And again, I think great directors know how to cast their films. That's many great directors talk about how casting is more than half the battle. Whether you're casting an actor, director of photography, a production designer, whatever, it's whatever they bring to the table. And so I think by him putting a different composer to do this, it would be easier to get to that point of just starting from scratch. He's like, you start this thing, you're like, what the hell, what's going on? He's in Italy, what is this? And he's speaking Italian and kind of, and then of course he's stuck in that town and he's very weak and kind of at first. There's also something that we really talked about in Equalizer of, there's a real Western kind of vibe to it, in the sense of like, there are Westerns with this story, the person, they get shot or whatever and they have to recover in the village, and then they start to love the people in the village. And there was always that sense of like, here comes the bandits are coming, and we also, of course, talked a lot about, our love of Italian film and Italian film music. For my money, still, it is the country that disproportionately has some of the greatest film music. To my taste, is Italy, because of course, Morricone and Nino Rota. I mean, the richness of the film music of Italy is incredible. So we definitely talked about that as well. Of course, we're dealing with the mafia, or the Camorra, as they call it there. And so we were talking about sort of how does this relate to those stories, and how does the music, and, all the way towards the end, when we have things that are kind of like, little homages to all those crime dramas that we loved from Italy from across, the decades.
And the story certainly is not unrealistic, as you mentioned before. I mean, it's not John Wick Part 4. So it's a little, let's say, it's a little more realistic. It is more internal.
Very internal.
It could happen to anybody, bullying, the mafia, people being forced out of their homes because they want to, build a hotel, and they want to evict the people and so on. So it does have a certain quality that people can actually also relate to.
Very much so, very much so. And I think that, like, in this movie is the one where you see McCall really having to face these existential questions. And I think it's the first one where also somebody takes him in. In the other Equalizer movies, he's him in his little apartment there, dealing with his life. He's his own person, very private. But this one, he loses control. He has to be taken care of by these people, otherwise he would have died, right? So these people take him in, not knowing who he is, only knowing that it's a big leap of faith from the doctor, from Enzo, to take him in. It's like, who's this guy? He was shot here. Obviously, he was up to no good. But And I think when I think one of the key phrases of the film is very early on when Enzo asks him, "Are you a good man or a bad man?" And he says, "I don't know." And I think that's the thesis of the film, if you will. And I think to the end, I'm not sure that he really knows, I mean, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think this is meant to be the final one, but you don't still know, is he at peace? Can the Equalizer ever be at peace? We don't know.
Very well said. Thank you, Marcelo. And we have a couple of minutes left, but I would like to end the conversation by talking about May December. And the film is now available on Netflix, or it has been so ever since December 1st. Certain countries still have to wait. It's not available in every country just yet. As I understand, and you wrote some music for the picture, a couple of cues, but he also had to adapt the music by Michael Legrand. You needed a way to figure out why you need to adapt a certain piece of music and as to why you need to write a new one from scratch.
Yeah. So this was always Todd's plan, was to use the music from The Go-Between by Michel Legrand. When he sent me the script, he also sent me this piece of music from the score, the pieces of music, I should say, and said, "I really want to use this stuff." He played it on the set. He wrote it into the script. He was very taken by that theme. It's a great theme. It's a great score. But he kind of wanted to have the cake and eat it too. He also wanted this to fit into a new film, to have the flexibility of adjusting everything from instrumentation to harmonies to tempi to whatever. He wanted to have control over it and treat it more like a piece of classical music. We talked a lot about a movie that we both love, Barry Lyndon, the Stanley Kubrick movie, where they used Handel's Saraband for the entire movie. You have that piece that then gets orchestrated. So I was thinking a lot about that. I mean, Todd comes from a very, very artistic, very sophisticated place when he's doing his films, and I think this one is right up there with the most sophisticated films that he's done, of how he deals with drama, because it's so many things at once. That's the thing about May December. I mean, it is an impossibly dark story, but ironically, some people see it as a comedy. It's nominated for a Golden Globe as a comedy this year, which is, and I think what gives some of this edge to it is the music. And what I realized, and again, when you work with a director, I think the best situation is when you really trust the director and you don't really know exactly where you're going. And with Todd Haynes, certainly that's the case. When he told me this, I was like, well, I'm not really sure how this is going to work, but hey, let's see. This is not very far from a beginner. He's one of the great directors, certainly one of my favorite directors of all time. And so he wanted to use that music. And there were places where he knew he wanted it to be, other places he wasn't sure. And then there were other places where he needed a different type of music, something more suspenseful, more ambient, or sometimes something more playful and not quite as dark. But what was interesting is that by using pre-existing music, the movie, the score breaks out of the rules of film scoring that certainly I have lived by up to this point. The music is not bringing you into the film. It's sort of like, the way Todd described is like, what I want the music to do is that once the viewer thinks that they know what this film is, I want the music to come and slap them in the face and say, no, this is not what you think it is. It's something different. And create a sense of discomfort and unease. And just sort of like you're walking around a forest and you don't know what's going to be behind a tree at any given point. Maybe a jaguar is going to jump and get you. So he wanted this we always talk about music being an extra character in a film. That's a very common way and very, I think, good way of describing music in film. But in this case, it's almost like this character is a character of the film, but the point of the character is to almost take you out and kind of like not to necessarily clarify things and not to also lull the viewer into like, I think that there's something very hypnotic about film scoring, how it can kind of bring you in and you might have a little string note that kind of starts quietly and you kind of lean in. In this one is about like just the score is like a cannonball, it just kind of it announces itself in such a violent way a lot of the times, and sometimes to kind of tragic effect, sometimes to humorous effect. I mean, I think one of them has become kind of a viral meme, when Gracie, Julianne Moore's character, opens the refrigerator and, ba-bam, ba-bam, and it's like, oh, we're going to run out of hot dogs. It's quite funny, when that happens. But it is, in the end, it's a product of, just like any other score that I've done, is a collaboration with the director in the sense that, he has this idea of what he wants for this film, and he wants the music to kind of tell us that we don't know who these characters are. And by the end of the film, I think you know less who the characters are than you do at the beginning, because you're like, wait, who's the only person you really understand towards the end is that the young man is, well, not young, he's 36 by that point. He's been really victimized by both women, both when he was a child and then as a grown-up. And the dynamic of the women, and how they look at each other it's definitely something straight out of Bergman. I think, the big inspiration for that film is Persona, I would say, where two women are start to kind of become each other. And that's certainly the case here. And it was always his plan. I never done anything like it where I had to adapt music like this. Once I saw it, and I think it's undeniable how effective it is. Not everybody's going to love it. I knew that, but everybody's affected by it. There's no, this is not a shy score by any stretch of imagination. And in some ways, the fact that it was not an original theme made it easier for me as a composer to kind of go there and just be that melodramatic and that kind of bombastic, because you're dealing with pre-existing material. Somehow it gave me more permission to do that. And that was very interesting. It was, every film, like I was saying, is a unique ecosystem, if you will, and certainly May December is quite unique.
Thank you, Marcelo. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up for today?
No, thank you very much. I mean, this is a really great deep dive. I appreciate it, Michael. I really am so happy to be talking to you. I hope this is the first of many times we get to talk about film and stuff. You're so knowledgeable, and you are so insightful in how you look at film music, and it's so important for all of us composers to know that our work is being looked at like this, with this level of care and intelligence. And I just appreciate what you do.
Thank you very much for your kind words. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. I appreciate that too, and I hope we will have the opportunity to chat again down the road. And thanks again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a nice day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.